The priest kicked a homeless man out of church, but when he heard him speak at the pulpit, Father Michael O'Brien stood at the altar of St. Patrick's Church, his weathered hands smoothing down his pristine white cassock. At 62, he had been the parish priest for over 3 decades, his once fiery red hair now a distinguished silver. His blue eyes, though still sharp, carried the weight of years spent tending to his flock in the small town of Millbrook. To his parishioners, Father O'Brien was a pillar of the community, known for his stirring sermons and unwavering dedication to tradition. He took pride in maintaining St. Patrick's as a bastion of old-world values in an ever-changing world. However, beneath his pious exterior lurked deeply ingrained prejudices, remnants of a bygone era that he had never fully left behind. Across town, in a small park that had become a makeshift home to several of Millbrook's less fortunate, Marcus Johnson was preparing for another day of survival. At 40, Marcus's dark skin was weathered by years on the streets, his once athletic frame now gaunt from too many missed meals. Despite the hardships he had faced, his brown eyes still held a glimmer of hope and kindness. Marcus had not always been homeless. Once a successful software engineer, a series of personal tragedies, the death of his wife, a battle with depression, and subsequent job loss had left him with nothing. He had drifted from city to city, eventually finding himself in Millbrook, drawn by its quaint charm and the promise of a fresh start. Despite his circumstances, Marcus maintained a deep faith. He found solace in prayer and often sought refuge in churches, finding peace in their quiet sanctuaries. His gentle demeanor and willingness to help others had made him well-liked among Millbrook's homeless community, though the broader town viewed him and his fellow homeless with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Little did Father O'Brien or Marcus know that their paths were about to cross in a way that would challenge their beliefs, shake the foundations of St. Patrick's Church, and set in motion a series of events that would have far-reaching consequences for both of them and the entire town of Millbrook. As the morning sun rose over Millbrook, casting long shadows across St. Patrick's stone facade, Father O'Brien began his daily routine of preparing the church for morning mass. Meanwhile, Marcus awoke on his park bench, saying a quiet prayer of thanks for another day and gathering his meager possessions. Neither man could have anticipated how this ordinary day would become a turning point in their lives, forcing them to confront their prejudices, their faith, and their understanding of what it truly means to be a good Christian. The day began like any other in Millbrook. Father O'Brien arrived at St. Patrick's Church early, as was his custom, to prepare for the morning mass. He moved through the familiar rituals with practiced ease, lighting candles, arranging hymnals, and ensuring everything was in its proper place. As he worked, he noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising a storm later in the day. Across town, Marcus Johnson woke to the first drops of rain hitting his face. He quickly gathered his few possessions, stuffing them into a worn backpack. The other homeless individuals in the park were similarly rushing to find shelter from the impending downpour. Marcus, remembering the peace he had found in churches in other towns, decided to seek refuge in St. Patrick's. As Marcus approached the church, the skies opened up, rain coming down in sheets. He hurried up the steps, pausing briefly at the entrance to shake off some of the water. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The interior of St. Patrick's was cool and quiet, the air heavy with the scent of incense and beeswax candles. Marcus moved slowly down the aisle, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. He slid into a pew near the back, closing his eyes and bowing his head in prayer, grateful for the sanctuary from the storm. Father O'Brien, hearing the door open, emerged from the sacristy. His eyes narrowed as he saw Marcus, taking in his bedraggled appearance and the puddle forming beneath him on the floor. Without hesitation, he strode down the aisle, his face set in a stern expression. "Excuse me," Father O'Brien said, his voice sharp. "This is a house of God, not a homeless shelter. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus looked up, startled by the priest's harsh tone. "I'm sorry, Father," he said softly. "I just needed a place to escape the rain. I'll be quiet, I promise. I'd like to pray, if that's all right." Father O'Brien's frown deepened. "I'm sure you would, but we can't have your kind in here. You'll disturb the other parishioners when they arrive for Mass. There are shelters for people like you." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, the pain of rejection he had faced too many times before. "Please, Father," he pleaded. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just need a dry place for a little while. Isn't the church supposed to help those in need?" The priest's face flushed with anger. "Don't presume to lecture me about the church's duties. We help plenty of people, but in organized, proper ways, not by letting vagrants drip all over our floors and scare away our congregation." As their voices raised, Mrs. Sullivan, a longtime parishioner who had been arranging flowers near the altar, approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, Father?" she asked, her eyes darting between the priest and Marcus. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Sullivan," Father O'Brien replied, his tone clipped. "This gentleman was just leaving." He turned back to Marcus, his voice lowering to a harsh whisper. "I won't ask again. Leave now, or I'll be forced to call the police." Marcus slowly stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He could feel Mrs. Sullivan's curious gaze and Father O'Brien's glare boring into him as he made his way back down the aisle. As he reached the door, he turned back, meeting the priest's eyes. "I forgive you, Father," Marcus said quietly, "and I'll pray for you. We all need God's love, especially in our darkest moments." With that, Marcus stepped back out into the rain, leaving Father O'Brien standing in stunned silence. As the door closed behind Marcus, the priest felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a mixture of shame and unease that he quickly pushed aside. Mrs. Sullivan approached Father O'Brien, her face a mask of concern. "Father, was that really necessary? The poor man was just seeking shelter." Father O'Brien straightened his cassock, his jaw set stubbornly. "We can't open our doors to every vagrant who wanders in, Mrs. Sullivan. We have to maintain standards. Now, let's finish preparing for Mass." As Father O'Brien returned to his duties, he couldn't shake the image of Marcus's eyes, filled with a mixture of hurt and forgiveness. Little did he know that this encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, compassion, and the true meaning of Christian charity. Outside, Marcus huddled under a nearby tree, the rain soaking through his already damp clothes. He closed his eyes, offering up a silent prayer for Father O'Brien and for himself, unaware that his quiet act of forgiveness was about to change not just his life, but the entire fabric of Millbrook's community. In the days following the incident at St. Patrick's, Father O'Brien found himself increasingly troubled. The encounter with Marcus had stirred something within him, a disquiet that he couldn't quite shake. He went about his duties as usual, but his mind kept returning to the look in Marcus's eyes as he left the church. One afternoon, as Father O'Brien was organizing donations for the church's food pantry, he came across a worn Bible among the items. Curious, he opened it and was surprised to find a name inscribed inside the cover, Marcus Johnson. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This must belong to the man he had turned away. As he flipped through the pages, Father O'Brien noticed countless annotations and underlined passages. One, in particular, caught his eye. Matthew 25:40. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The words, so familiar yet suddenly so poignant, seemed to stare back at him accusingly. Driven by a mix of curiosity and growing unease, Father O'Brien decided to investigate further. He reached out to his contacts at local shelters and soup kitchens, inquiring about Marcus. What he discovered shocked him to his core. Marcus, he learned, was not just another homeless drifter. He was a man who, despite his own hardships, constantly looked for ways to help others. Shelter workers spoke of how Marcus would often give up his own meal to someone who needed it more, or spend hours comforting newcomers struggling to adjust to life on the streets. They told stories of his unwavering faith, how he would lead prayer circles and offer words of encouragement to those who had lost hope. One shelter volunteer, her voice filled with admiration, recounted how Marcus had once talked a young man out of suicide, spending an entire night with him and ultimately connecting him with mental health services. "He's an angel," she said. "We're blessed to have him around." As Father O'Brien absorbed these stories, he felt a profound sense of shame wash over him. He had judged Marcus solely on his appearance, never bothering to look deeper or consider his humanity. The priest realized with growing horror that in turning Marcus away, he had not only failed as a Christian, but had also deprived his congregation of a truly inspiring presence. The revelation forced Father O'Brien to confront his own prejudices and the gap between his professed beliefs and his actions. He began to see how his focus on maintaining the church's image and catering to its more affluent members had led him astray from the true teachings of Christ. In a moment of clarity, Father O'Brien remembered the words of Pope Francis. The measure of the greatness of a society is found in the way it treats those most in need, those who have nothing apart from their poverty. He realized that he had been measuring the greatness of his church by its appearance and traditions, rather than by its compassion and inclusivity. This discovery shook Father O'Brien to his core. He spent a sleepless night poring over his own Bible, rereading passages about charity, compassion, and the equality of all people in God's eyes. By morning, he knew he had to make amends, not just to Marcus, but to all those he had failed in his ministry. As the sun rose over Millbrook, Father O'Brien made a decision that would change the course of his life and the future of St. Patrick's Church. He would find Marcus, apologize, and make things right. But more than that, he would use this experience as a catalyst for change, transforming St. Patrick's into a truly welcoming and inclusive place of worship. Little did Father O'Brien know that this revelation was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge him, his congregation, and the entire town of Millbrook to re-examine their values and their treatment of those less fortunate. Father O'Brien's decision to find Marcus and make amends was not an easy one. It required him to swallow his pride, confront his prejudices, and risk the disapproval of some of his more conservative parishioners. Nevertheless, he knew it was the right thing to do, both as a priest and as a human being. The search for Marcus proved more challenging than Father O'Brien had anticipated. He spent days visiting shelters, soup kitchens, and known gathering spots for the homeless community. At each stop, he heard more stories of Marcus's kindness and generosity, deepening his sense of remorse for his earlier actions. Finally, after nearly a week of searching, Father O'Brien found Marcus in the park where he often slept. The priest approached cautiously, his heart pounding with nervous energy. "Marcus?" he called softly. "It's Father O'Brien from St. Patrick's. I've been looking for you." Marcus looked up, surprise and wariness flickering across his face. "Father," he acknowledged with a nod, "what can I do for you?" Father O'Brien took a deep breath. "I've come to apologize, Marcus. My behavior towards you was inexcusable. I judged you without knowing you, and in doing so, I failed in my duty as a priest and as a Christian. I am truly sorry." Marcus studied the priest's face for a long moment before responding. "I appreciate your apology, Father. It can't have been easy for you to come here." Encouraged by Marcus's response, Father O'Brien pressed on. "I'd like to make it up to you if I can. Would you consider coming back to St. Patrick's? Not just for shelter, but to share your faith and experiences with our congregation. I think we could learn a lot from you." Marcus was taken aback by the offer. "Are you sure, Father? I wouldn't want to cause any trouble." "I'm sure," Father O'Brien said firmly. "In fact, I'd like you to speak at this Sunday's Mass, if you're willing. Your story, your faith despite adversity, it's something our congregation needs to hear." After some hesitation, Marcus agreed. Father O'Brien felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he knew this was just the beginning of the challenges he would face. The consequences of Father O'Brien's decision were immediate and far-reaching. When he announced to the church council that he had invited Marcus to speak at Sunday's Mass, the reactions were mixed. Some members, like Mrs. Sullivan, were supportive, seeing it as a positive step towards a more inclusive church. Others, however, were openly hostile to the idea. "You can't be serious, Father," protested Mr. Hawkins, a prominent businessman and major donor to the church. "Letting a homeless man speak during Mass? What's next, inviting drug addicts to lead the choir?" Father O'Brien stood his ground. "Marcus has much to teach us about faith and perseverance, Mr. Hawkins. I believe this is an opportunity for our congregation to grow in compassion and understanding." The news spread quickly through Millbrook's gossip grapevine. By Sunday morning, the church was packed, with curious onlookers joining the regular parishioners. As Marcus took the pulpit, dressed in clean but simple clothes provided by the church, a hush fell over the congregation. Marcus spoke softly at first, sharing his story of loss and struggle. But as he continued, his voice grew stronger, filled with conviction as he talked about finding God's love in the darkest moments of his life. He spoke of the kindness he had experienced from strangers and how it had strengthened his faith in humanity and in God. "I may not have a home," Marcus concluded, "but I have never felt abandoned by God. He is with us always, in the hearts of those who show kindness and in the courage we find to face each day." The impact of Marcus's words was profound. Many in the congregation were moved to tears. Even Mr. Hawkins, who had been skeptical, seemed touched by Marcus's sincerity and faith. However, not everyone was swayed. A small group of parishioners walked out during the speech, muttering about the church losing its way. Father O'Brien watched them go with a heavy heart but remained convinced he had made the right decision. In the weeks that followed, Father O'Brien faced both positive and negative consequences for his actions. Attendance at services increased, with many people drawn by the church's new, more inclusive approach. Donations to the church's outreach programs also saw a significant uptick. On the other hand, some longtime parishioners left the church, uncomfortable with the changes. The church council was divided, with heated debates about the direction St. Patrick's should take. Father O'Brien also faced personal attacks. Anonymous letters accused him of corrupting the church, and there were calls for the diocese to remove him from his position. The priest found these challenges difficult, but remained steadfast in his conviction that he was following Christ's true teachings. Throughout it all, Marcus became a regular presence at St. Patrick's, not just attending services, but also helping with the church's expanded outreach programs. His gentle demeanor and unwavering faith helped to win over many who had initially been skeptical. As the dust began to settle, Father O'Brien realized that his decision had set in motion a transformation, not just of St. Patrick's, but of himself. He was becoming the priest he had always aspired to be, leading his flock towards greater compassion and understanding. The journey was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead. But as Father O'Brien looked out at his diverse congregation, with Marcus sitting in the front pew, he felt a sense of peace. As Father O'Brien and Marcus worked to transform St. Patrick's Church, a secondary plot began to unfold in the town of Millbrook. The controversy surrounding the church had sparked intense discussions about homelessness, race, and social responsibility throughout the community. Sarah Thompson, a young journalist for the local newspaper, found herself drawn to the story. Initially assigned to write a simple piece about the unusual happenings at St. Patrick's, Sarah soon realized there was a much deeper narrative to explore. As she delved into her investigation, Sarah uncovered a pattern of systemic neglect towards Millbrook's homeless population. The town's shelter was underfunded and overcrowded, and local businesses often called the police to remove homeless individuals from their premises. She also found evidence of racial bias in how these issues were handled, with people of color being disproportionately affected. Sarah's articles began to shed light on these issues, forcing the town to confront uncomfortable truths about its treatment of its most vulnerable citizens. Her reporting sparked a heated debate in the town council, with some members calling for increased funding for social services, while others argued that such measures would only attract more homeless individuals to Millbrook. Meanwhile, inspired by the changes at St. Patrick's, other religious leaders in town began to re-examine their own practices. Rabbi David Goldstein of Temple Beth Israel reached out to Father O'Brien, proposing an interfaith initiative to address homelessness in Millbrook. The initiative gained momentum, with several churches, the synagogue, and even the local mosque joining forces. They began organizing weekly community meals, setting up a clothing donation program, and advocating for better social services. However, not everyone in Millbrook was supportive of these changes. A group of business owners, led by Mr. Hawkins, who had left St. Patrick's, formed a coalition to preserve Millbrook's character. They argued that the increased visibility of homeless individuals was bad for tourism and property values. The group began pressuring the town council to pass stricter anti-loitering laws and to relocate the homeless shelter to the outskirts of town. Their efforts gained traction with some of the more conservative council members, setting the stage for a showdown at the next council meeting. As tensions in the town rose, Sarah continued her reporting, working to give voice to those who had long been ignored. She interviewed homeless individuals, social workers, and advocates, painting a comprehensive picture of the challenges facing Millbrook's most vulnerable residents. One of her most impactful stories featured Marcus, detailing his journey from successful professional to homelessness and his unwavering faith throughout his struggles. The article humanized the issue for many Millbrook residents, challenging their preconceptions about homelessness. Father O'Brien, recognizing the importance of Sarah's work, began to incorporate discussion of her articles into his sermons, encouraging his congregation to engage with these issues beyond the church walls. As the date of the critical town council meeting approached, Millbrook found itself at a crossroads. The debate over how to address homelessness had become a proxy for larger questions about the town's values and identity. Sarah's reporting had brought these issues to the forefront, forcing residents to confront their biases and consider their responsibilities to their fellow citizens. The Interfaith Initiative, sparked by the changes at St. Patrick's, offered a model for compassionate action. But the backlash from some quarters of the community threatened to undo this progress. The upcoming council meeting would be crucial in determining Millbrook's path forward. As these events unfolded, the secondary plot served to expand the impact of Father O'Brien and Marcus's story beyond the walls of St. Patrick's. Their personal journey of transformation had become the catalyst for a town-wide reckoning with issues of faith, compassion, and social justice. The evolving relationship between Father O'Brien and Marcus became the cornerstone of the changes at St. Patrick's Church and increasingly in the wider Millbrook community. What had begun as a moment of conflict had transformed into a partnership that challenged preconceptions and inspired others. In the months following Marcus's first appearance at the church, Father O'Brien found himself relying more and more on the formerly homeless man's insights and experiences. They began meeting regularly, not just to discuss church matters, but to engage in deep conversations about faith, social justice, and the nature of community. For Father O'Brien, these discussions were often challenging, forcing him to confront his own biases and the limitations of his worldview. He realized that despite his years of theological study, Marcus's lived experiences offered a perspective on faith and perseverance that no textbook could provide. "You know, Marcus," Father O'Brien said during one of their talks, "I've been a priest for over 30 years, but I feel like I'm just now beginning to understand what it truly means to serve." Marcus nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "Sometimes, Father, we need to be shaken out of our comfort to really see the world as it is, and to see others as God sees them." As their friendship deepened, Father O'Brien found himself opening up to Marcus about his own struggles and doubts. He shared stories of his childhood in a segregated neighborhood, acknowledging how those early experiences had shaped his prejudices. Marcus listened without judgment, offering insights that helped the priest begin to heal old wounds and overcome ingrained biases. In turn, Marcus found in Father O'Brien a steadfast ally and support. The priest worked tirelessly to help Marcus get back on his feet, assisting with job applications and even offering him a part-time position as the church's outreach coordinator. Their growing friendship did not go unnoticed by the congregation. Many were inspired by the sight of the older white priest and the younger black man working side by side, their obvious respect and affection for each other, a powerful testament to the possibility of bridging divides. Mrs. Sullivan, who had witnessed the initial confrontation between them, remarked to a fellow parishioner, "If those two can overcome their differences, maybe there's hope for all of us." However, not everyone was supportive of this new dynamic. Some of the more conservative church members grumbled about Marcus having too much influence over the priest. There were whispers about keeping the church the way it's always been. Father O'Brien and Marcus faced these challenges together, their united front often disarming critics. When a parishioner complained about Marcus's prominent role in the church, Father O'Brien responded firmly. Marcus has shown us the true meaning of Christian charity. His presence here is a blessing to us all. As their partnership became more established, Father O'Brien and Marcus began to work together on expanding the church's community outreach. They launched new initiatives, including a mentoring program that paired homeless individuals with church members who could offer support and guidance. One particularly powerful moment came when Father O'Brien and Marcus co-delivered a sermon on unity and acceptance. As they stood side by side at the pulpit, their different voices blending in a message of love and compassion, many in the congregation were moved to tears. "We are all God's children," Marcus said, his voice ringing out in the hushed church. "When we open our hearts to one another, we open our hearts to Him." Father O'Brien nodded, adding, "In our differences, we find strength. In our unity, we find grace." Their relationship also extended beyond the church. Father O'Brien invited Marcus to family dinners, introducing him to his sister and her children. Marcus, in turn, brought Father O'Brien to meet his friends in the homeless community, helping the priest develop a deeper understanding of their struggles and resilience. As months passed, the bond between Father O'Brien and Marcus continued to strengthen. They celebrated each other's victories, Marcus finding permanent housing, Father O'Brien receiving an award for community service, and supported each other through challenges. Their friendship became a symbol of hope and reconciliation in Millbrook. It demonstrated the power of openness, empathy, and shared purpose to overcome prejudice and mistrust. As they worked together to create a more inclusive and compassionate community, Father O'Brien and Marcus showed that meaningful change was possible, one relationship at a time. Their evolving partnership set the stage for broader transformations, not just within St. Patrick's, but throughout Millbrook. As they prepared to face the challenges ahead, particularly the looming town council decision, Father O'Brien and Marcus knew that whatever came, they would face it together, a living example of the unity they preached. The tensions that had been building in Millbrook came to a head on a crisp autumn evening as the town council gathered for its much-anticipated meeting on the homeless issue. The council chambers were packed, with citizens spilling out into the hallways and gathered in front of the building. Father O'Brien and Marcus arrived together, making their way through the crowd. They could feel the weight of expectation on their shoulders, knowing that their actions over the past months had played a significant role in bringing this moment to fruition. As the meeting began, it quickly became clear that the town was deeply divided. Mr. Hawkins and his coalition of business owners presented their case for stricter anti-loitering laws and the relocation of the homeless shelter. Their arguments were met with both cheers and boos from the audience. Sarah Thompson, the young journalist, was there, furiously taking notes. Her series of articles had helped to frame the debate, and many in the room were curious to see how she would report on this crucial meeting. When it came time for public comments, Marcus stepped up to the podium. A hush fell over the room as he began to speak, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I stand before you not just as a man who has experienced homelessness," he said, "but as a member of this community. We are not separate from those we see on the streets. We are all one community, and how we treat our most vulnerable reflects on us all." His words seemed to strike a chord with many in the audience. Even some who had been skeptical began to nod in agreement. But as Marcus concluded his speech, Mr. Hawkins stood up, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "We can't let our town be overrun by vagrants and criminals. We need to protect our way of life." The room erupted into chaos. Supporters of both sides began shouting at each other, while the council members struggled to maintain order. In the midst of the uproar, Father O'Brien made his way to the podium. "Please," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "Let us remember that we are all neighbors here. We may disagree, but we must do so with respect and compassion." As Father O'Brien continued to speak, sharing stories of the positive changes he had seen through the church's outreach programs, the room gradually quieted. His words, infused with the lessons he had learned from Marcus, seemed to bridge the divide that had seemed so insurmountable moments before. Just as it seemed a resolution might be possible, A commotion at the back of the room caught everyone's attention. A group of homeless individuals, many of whom had been helped by St. Patrick's programs, had arrived. They had come not to protest, but to participate in the democratic process that would decide their fates. The sight of these individuals, tired, worn, but dignified in their desire to be heard, had a profound impact on the room. It was one thing to debate policy in the abstract, but quite another to see the faces of those who would be directly affected by the council's decision. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The angry shouts were replaced by thoughtful murmurs. People who had been on opposite sides of the issue began to engage in quiet conversations. As the council prepared to vote on the proposed measures, there was a palpable sense that something had changed. The climactic confrontation had become a catalyst for genuine dialogue and understanding. Father O'Brien and Marcus exchanged a look of cautious hope. Whatever the outcome of the vote, they knew that Millbrook had turned a corner. The conversation about homelessness and community responsibility would never be the same again. As the council members cast their votes, the room held its breath. The decision they were about to make would not just determine policy, but would reveal the true character of Millbrook and its citizens. As the town council members prepared to cast their votes, the tension in the room was palpable. Father O'Brien and Marcus stood side by side, their presence a silent testimony to the power of understanding and reconciliation. Sarah Thompson, pen poised over her notebook, was ready to record this pivotal moment in Millbrook's history. Mayor Clara Jenkins, a normally unflappable woman in her early 60s, took a deep breath before speaking. "Before we vote," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed room, "I'd like to propose a compromise." All eyes turned to the mayor as she outlined her plan. Instead of simply voting for or against the stricter laws proposed by Mr. Hawkins and his group, she suggested forming a task force. This group would be charged with developing a comprehensive plan to address homelessness in Millbrook, taking into account the needs of all citizens. This task force, Mayor Jenkins continued, should include representatives from all sides of this issue: business owners, homeless advocates, religious leaders, and most importantly, individuals who have experienced homelessness themselves. The proposal was met with a mixture of reactions. Some council members nodded approvingly, while others looked skeptical. In the audience, there were murmurs of both support and dissent. Mr. Hawkins stood up, his face flushed. "Madam Mayor, we don't need more talk. We need action. Our businesses are suffering now." Before the mayor could respond, Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand your concerns. But wouldn't it be better to find a solution that works for everyone, rather than just pushing the problem out of sight?" Father O'Brien joined in, addressing the council and the audience. This task force could be an opportunity for Millbrook to become a model for other communities. We could show that it's possible to support both a thriving business district and a compassionate approach to those in need. As discussion continued, it became clear that while the mayor's proposal hadn't magically solved the conflict, it had changed the nature of the debate. Instead of two sides arguing against each other, people began to consider how they might work together. Sarah Thompson, seeing the shift in the room, raised her hand to speak. When acknowledged, she shared some of the data she had gathered in her reporting. "The most successful programs for addressing homelessness in other towns," she explained, "have been those that involved collaboration between multiple sectors of the community." Her words seemed to carry weight, particularly with some of the council members who had been on the fence. The idea of Millbrook becoming a leader in addressing this issue appealed to their civic pride. As the discussion progressed, specific ideas for the task force began to take shape. It was agreed that the group should include an equal number of representatives from the business community and social services sectors. Marcus was nominated to represent the homeless population, a suggestion that was met with widespread approval. Father O'Brien, in a move that surprised many, nominated Mr. Hawkins to be part of the task force. "If we're going to find a real solution," he explained, "we need to include all perspectives, even those we might disagree with." Mr. Hawkins, taken aback by this gesture, found himself reluctantly nodding in agreement. The tension that had marked his demeanor throughout the meeting began to ease slightly. As the council moved to vote on the creation of the task force, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the room. The motion passed with a strong majority, with even some of Mr. Hawkins's initial supporters voting in favor. Mayor Jenkins, looking relieved, outlined the next steps. The task force would have 3 months to develop its recommendations, after which there would be another town council meeting to discuss and potentially implement their suggestions. As the meeting adjourned, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. People who had entered as adversaries were now talking to each other, exchanging contact information and ideas for the task force. Father O'Brien and Marcus made their way through the crowd, receiving words of thanks and congratulations from many. Even Mr. Hawkins approached them, his manner stiff but not hostile. "I still have my doubts about all this," he said gruffly, "but I suppose I'm willing to give it a try." Marcus extended his hand, which after a moment's hesitation, Mr. Hawkins shook. It was a small gesture, but one that held the promise of future understanding. As they left the town hall, Father O'Brien turned to Marcus. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," he said, "but I think we've made a good start." Marcus nodded, a small smile on his face. "It's a beginning," he agreed. "Real change takes time, but at least now we have a chance to make it happen." Sarah Thompson, who had overheard their exchange, approached them. "Would you both be willing to give me an interview about tonight's events?" she asked. "I think your perspective could really help people understand the importance of what happened here." As they agreed to the interview, all three felt a sense of accomplishment, mixed with the weight of the task ahead. The conflict wasn't fully resolved. There would be more debates, more disagreements, more challenges to overcome. But a framework for addressing these issues had been established, and with it, a glimmer of hope for a more united and compassionate Millbrook. Over the next few weeks, the task force began to take shape. True to the mayor's word, it included a diverse range of voices from across the community. Marcus and Mr. Hawkins found themselves working side by side, their initial animosity slowly giving way to a grudging respect as they tackled the complex issues at hand. Marcus nodded, a small smile on his face. "We've all come a long way. This plan isn't perfect, but it's a real start." Father O'Brien looked at the two men, marveling at the changes he had witnessed, in them, in himself, and in the town. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "Millbrook is already a better place for having gone through this process." As they parted ways that night, there was a sense of cautious optimism. The conflict that had once threatened to tear Millbrook apart had become a catalyst for growth and understanding. While challenges remained, the town had shown that it was capable of coming together to address even the most divisive issues. The next day, as the task force presented its recommendations to a packed town council meeting, there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. The plan was met with a mix of reactions: enthusiasm from some, skepticism from others, and thoughtful consideration from many. As the council prepared to vote on whether to adopt the recommendations, Father O'Brien, Marcus, and Mr. Hawkins exchanged glances. Regardless of the outcome, they knew that Millbrook had already taken its first steps towards becoming a more compassionate and united community. The journey of conflict resolution had been challenging, but it had laid the groundwork for lasting change. The town council's vote to adopt the task force's recommendations marked a significant turning point for Millbrook. With a clear majority in favor, the town committed itself to a new direction in addressing homelessness and community relations. In the days that followed, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the town. The divisiveness that had characterized the earlier debates gave way to a sense of shared purpose. Citizens from all walks of life began to take an active interest in the implementation of the new programs. Father O'Brien found himself at the center of this transformation. St. Patrick's Church became a hub for many of the new initiatives, hosting job training workshops, counseling sessions, and community meetings. The priest's sermons, once focused primarily on traditional doctrine, now regularly incorporated themes of social justice and community responsibility. Marcus, with his first-hand experience of homelessness and his natural leadership abilities, became a key figure in the new job training program. His success in this role challenged many people's preconceptions about the homeless, further breaking down barriers in the community. Even Mr. Hawkins, who had once been the face of opposition to these changes, found himself becoming an advocate for the new programs. He worked with other business owners to create job opportunities for program participants, discovering that this not only helped the community but also benefited his business through positive publicity and a motivated workforce. Sarah Thompson's continued reporting on these developments helped to maintain public engagement and support. Her articles, which once focused on exposing problems, now highlighted success stories and ongoing challenges, providing a nuanced picture of Millbrook's journey. As word of Millbrook's innovative approach spread, the town began to attract attention from other communities facing similar issues. Father O'Brien, Marcus, and Mr. Hawkins found themselves invited to speak at conferences and consult with other towns, sharing the lessons they had learned. This new direction was not without its challenges. There were setbacks in program implementation, ongoing debates about resource allocation, and occasional flare-ups of old prejudices. However, the framework established by the task force provided a foundation for addressing these issues constructively. Perhaps the most significant change was in the way Millbrook's citizens viewed themselves and their community. There was a growing sense of pride in their ability to come together and tackle difficult problems. The town that had once been divided was becoming known as a model of community cooperation and innovative problem-solving. As Father O'Brien reflected on this transformation, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey that had begun with his confrontation with Marcus had led to a renewal not just of his faith, but of his entire community. Millbrook was embarking on a new chapter, one defined by compassion, inclusivity, and a commitment to the well-being of all its citizens. As the one-year anniversary of Marcus's first visit to St. Patrick's approached, Father O'Brien found himself in a reflective mood. Sitting in his study, surrounded by books on theology and social justice, he marveled at how much had changed, in himself, in his church, and in Millbrook as a whole. The priest who had once turned away a man in need now led a congregation known for its radical inclusivity and community outreach. Father O'Brien's sermons, once focused on abstract concepts of morality, now regularly addressed real-world issues of poverty, discrimination, and social responsibility. He had learned to see his faith not just as a set of beliefs, but as a call to action. "I thought I knew what it meant to be a good Christian," Father O'Brien mused to Marcus during one of their regular meetings. "But you taught me that true faith is about more than rituals and traditions. It's about how we treat each other, especially those society often overlooks." Marcus, too, had undergone a profound transformation. From a man living on the margins of society, he had become a respected community leader. His role in the job training program had given him a new sense of purpose, and he found deep fulfillment in helping others overcome the challenges he had faced. "You know, Father," Marcus said, a thoughtful expression on his face, "a year ago, I never would have imagined being where I am now. It just goes to show that change is always possible, no matter how unlikely it may seem." Even Mr. Hawkins, once the face of opposition to Millbrook's changes, had experienced significant growth. His involvement in the task force and subsequent community initiatives had opened his eyes to realities he had previously ignored. While he remained a pragmatic businessman, he had developed a new understanding of social responsibility and the interconnectedness of community well-being and economic success. During a Chamber of Commerce meeting, Mr. Hawkins surprised many by saying, "Our bottom line has actually improved since we started participating in these community programs. It turns out that doing good can be good for business too." Sarah Thompson's journey mirrored that of the town she reported on. Her articles had evolved from exposés of community problems to nuanced explorations of complex social issues. She had learned to see beyond simple narratives of heroes and villains, instead portraying the multifaceted reality of a community in transition. In one of her reflective pieces, Sarah wrote, "Millbrook's story is not one of overnight transformation, but of ongoing growth and learning. It's a testament to what can happen when a community chooses understanding over division and compassion over fear." As Father O'Brien prepared for the anniversary service, he found himself filled with a sense of both accomplishment and humility. The changes in Millbrook had been significant, but he knew they were just the beginning. There would always be more work to do, more bridges to build, more understanding to foster. Looking out his window at the town he had served for so many years, Father O'Brien saw it with new eyes. The streets he had once patrolled for undesirables now bustled with a diverse mix of people, all part of the rich tapestry of the community. The church that had once been a bastion of tradition now stood as a symbol of progressive faith and active community engagement. As he reflected on his own journey from prejudice to acceptance, from rigid dogma to living faith, Father O'Brien felt a deep sense of gratitude. His encounter with Marcus had not just changed his life, but had set in motion a transformation that touched countless others. With a sense of renewed purpose, Father O'Brien turned to finish his anniversary sermon. He knew that the words he would speak the next day were not just about celebrating the past year's achievements, but about committing to the ongoing work of building a more just and compassionate community. The journey of growth and change was far from over, but Father O'Brien felt ready and eager to continue on the path. "You know, Father," Marcus said, a thoughtful expression on his face, "a year ago, I never would have imagined being where I am now. It just goes to show that change is always possible, no matter how unlikely it may seem." Even Mr. Hawkins, once the face of opposition to Millbrook's changes, had experienced significant growth. His involvement in the task force and subsequent community initiatives had opened his eyes to realities he had previously ignored. While he remained a pragmatic businessman, he had developed a new understanding of social responsibility and the interconnectedness of community well-being and economic success. During a Chamber of Commerce meeting, Mr. Hawkins surprised many by saying, "Our bottom line has actually improved since we started participating in these community programs. It turns out that doing good can be good for business too." Sarah Thompson's journey mirrored that of the town she reported on. Her articles had evolved from exposés of community problems to nuanced explorations of complex social issues. She had learned to see beyond simple narratives of heroes and villains, instead portraying the multifaceted reality of a community in transition. In one of her reflective pieces, Sarah wrote, "Millbrook's story is not one of overnight transformation, but of ongoing growth and learning. It's a testament to what can happen when a community chooses understanding over division and compassion over fear." As Father O'Brien prepared for the anniversary service, he found himself filled with a sense of both accomplishment and humility. The changes in Millbrook had been significant, but he knew they were just the beginning. There would always be more work to do, more bridges to build, more understanding to foster. Looking out his window at the town he had served for so many years, Father O'Brien saw it with new eyes. The streets he had once patrolled for undesirables now bustled with a diverse mix of people, all part of the rich tapestry of the community. The church that had once been a bastion of tradition now stood as a symbol of progressive faith and active community engagement. As he reflected on his own journey from prejudice to acceptance, from rigid dogma to living faith, Father O'Brien felt a deep sense of gratitude. His encounter with Marcus had not just changed his life, but had set in motion a transformation that touched countless others. With a sense of renewed purpose, Father O'Brien turned to finish his anniversary sermon. He knew that the words he would speak the next day were not just about celebrating the past year's achievements, but about committing to the ongoing work of building a more just and compassionate community. The journey of growth and change was far from over, but Father O'Brien felt ready and eager to continue on the path. As Father O'Brien stood at the pulpit on the anniversary Sunday, he looked out at the diverse congregation before him. The pews were filled with faces of all colors and backgrounds. Longtime parishioners sat alongside newcomers, business owners next to those who had once been homeless. Marcus and Mr. Hawkins sat side by side in the front row, a living testament to the power of reconciliation. "A year ago," Father O'Brien began, his voice strong and clear, "I stood in this very spot, a man blind to my own prejudices and the true meaning of Christian charity. But God works in mysterious ways, and through an act of intolerance, He opened my eyes to a greater truth." He went on to recount the journey of the past year. the challenges, the triumphs, and the ongoing work of building a more inclusive community. He spoke of the transformative power of empathy and understanding, and the importance of seeing the divine in every human being, regardless of their circumstances. "We have come far," he concluded, "but our journey is not over. Every day, we must choose to see the best in one another, to reach out to those in need, and to build a community where all are welcomed and valued." As the congregation rose to sing the final hymn, there was a palpable sense of unity and purpose in the air. The story of St. Patrick's and Millbrook had become one of hope, a powerful reminder that change is possible, that communities can heal, and that faith, when lived out in action, has the power to transform lives. As the last notes of the hymn faded away, Father O'Brien looked out at his flock, his heart full. The church that had once turned away a man in need had become a beacon of inclusivity and compassion. And in that transformation, they had all found a deeper, truer expression of their faith.